In this videotape, we're going to be going over the idea of percent. Basically, percent refers to the number of parts per hundred. The number of parts per hundred. So, for example, if I speak about 53%, this refers to 53 parts in 100, or 53 out of 100. This is equivalent to 53%. We would like to develop a way of going from fractions and decimals to percents and back again. To change a fraction or decimal to a percent. Basically, we know we need to figure out the number of parts per hundred. So, for example, if we had a decimal like 0.19 or 19 hundredths, 0.19 is the same as 19 hundredths. This would be equivalent to 19 parts out of 100, or 19%. Similarly, if we had a decimal like 0.3, 3/10, this is the same as 0.30, or 30 hundredths, which means 30 out of 100, or 30%. Okay, following this procedure, and obviously we can talk about this either being a decimal or a fraction and trying to change it into a percent. In both cases, what we have been doing essentially is to multiply by 100 and add the percent sign. So to take a fraction or a decimal and change it to a percent, we have been multiplying by 100. If we multiply a decimal by 100, we move the decimal 2 places to the right. So we are multiplying by 100 and adding the percent sign. Here, multiplying by 100 and adding the percent sign. So that will be our basic rule, to change a fraction or a decimal to a percent. Multiply by 100 and add the percent sign. Let's try some examples. Let's say we had the fraction 2/5. To change this fraction to a percent, we are going to multiply by 100 and add the percent sign. Okay, so 2/5 will be equivalent to, now, this can be thought of as 5 goes into 100, 20 times 2 times 20, or 40%. So 2/5, to change 2/5 into a percent, we multiplied by 100 and add the percent sign to get 40%. 2/5 is equivalent to 40%. Similarly, if you had the decimal 0.175, or 175 thousandths, to change to a percent, you would multiply by 100 and add the percent sign. It would be multiply by 100 and add the percent sign. Multiplying a decimal by 100 like this means you're moving the decimal point 2 places to the right. So this is going to be moving the decimal point 2 places to the right, 17.5%. 0.175 is equivalent to 17.5%. 2/5 is equivalent to 40%. Now, going the other way, if we want to change a percent to a decimal or fraction, we will simply reverse the procedure. We will drop the percent sign and multiply, and divide by 100. Whereas before we multiplied by 100 and added the percent sign, now we will drop the percent sign and divide by 100. So for example, 37%. If we want to rewrite that as a decimal or a fraction, we will drop the percent sign and divide by 100. Now, you can divide by 100 either this way, to write it 37 divided by 100 in that fashion, and dropping the percent sign, or you can think of this as 37.0, of course, and to divide by 100, you can move the decimal 2 places to the left and drop the percent sign to get 0.37. So in this way, we can change a percent to either a decimal or a fraction, dividing in both cases by 100 and dropping the percent sign. Let's try a simple word problem involving percent. If 3/8 of a teacher's work involves non-teaching administrative assignments, and the remainder is spent on classroom instruction, if 3/8 of a teacher's work involves non-teaching administrative assignments and the remainder is spent on classroom instruction, what percent of his work involves actual teaching? Three-eighths of a teacher's work involves non-teaching administrative assignments. The rest of the time is spent on classroom instruction. What percent of his work involves actual teaching? Okay, well, if 3/8 of his time is spent on non-teaching assignments, then the remainder, which is 5/8, okay, of the work is spent on the actual teaching. What we need to do is to express this as a percent. We want to change a fraction, in this case, to a percent. So we know that we're going to have to multiply by 100 and add the percent sign. So this is going to be equivalent to 500 divided by 8%. That's how much, that's a percent of his work involving actual teaching. Now, 500 divided by 8. 500 divided by 8 can be worked out with long division. 500 divided by 8. Put the decimal point in the answer right over the decimal point here. And we have 8 into 5. No, 8 goes into 56 times. 8 times 6, 48. Subtract. 50, take away 48, 2. Bring down the 0. 8 goes into 20. 2 times 8, 16. Subtract, bring down the next 0. 8 goes into 45 times, 5 times 8, 40, and there is no remainder. So we see that 500 divided by 8 is 62.5. So we get, for an answer here, 62.5%. 3/8 was of the time the teacher was out of the classroom. The remainder of the time, the 5/8 of the time he was spending it on actual instruction. To change it to a percent, we multiplied by 100 and added the percent sign, giving us 500 over 8%, or 62.5%. Now let's look at some problems involving percent. Most problems involving percent can be solved by setting up a proportion of the form x is to w as p is to 100, where x represents some part of w, which is the whole, and p refers to the percent. The number is actually the number without the percent sign, but the number of parts in 100. So we're talking about setting up a proportion, and most of the problems you're going to have, if not all of the problems, can be solved by setting up a proportion in this way, that x is to w as p is to 100. The part is to the whole as p, the number of percent, is to 100. For example, look at the following statement. 25% of 80 is 20. This is a true statement. In this particular statement, you are being given the x, the w, and the p for the proportion. In other words, when you see the number with the percent, that is the p. Of 80 is 20. 20 represents the part of 80. So 20 is the part, which is x. 80 is the w, which is the whole. Setting up the proportion, x is to w as p is to 100. We would have that x is to w, 20 is to 80, as 25 is to 100. And this is a true statement. You can see that either by reducing both fractions to lowest terms, 20 over 80, dividing top and bottom by 20 leaves you with 1/4. 25 over 100 dividing top and bottom by 25 leaves you once again with 1/4. This is a true statement. You could also see it by cross multiplying. Okay? You can multiply in a proportion. You can multiply the upper left times the lower right and set that equal to the product of the upper right times the lower left. The upper left times the lower right equals the lower left times the upper right, or the product of the means equals the product of the extremes. You may have heard it that way. Basically, you are allowed to cross multiply. Now, obviously, in this particular case, it was not that important because you were given the x, the w, and the p. In the problems that will follow in this tape, each of the problems you will be missing either the x, the w, or the p, and it will be your job to figure out which one you're missing and to be able to solve for that quantity. Let's try some of these problems. We'll have to set up the proportion and solve for the one that's missing. Okay. What is 40% of 75? This is the first problem. What is 40% of 75? X is to w as p is to 100. When you see the 40%, that tells you right away the percent is 40. So that's 40 over 100. So we know that we have the p. What is 40% of 75? Okay, something is going to be 40% of 75. 75 must be the whole. the W. And we are looking for the what, which in this case is the X. The piece of the whole, the part of the whole. Now, that's X. Now, to solve for this, to solve a proportion of this type, when you're missing either the X, the W, or the P, and you have to solve for it, all you have to do is cross multiply. So X times 100, or 100X, equals 75 times 40. 100X equals 75 times 40. That's 0. 4 times 5, 0. 20. Carry the 2. 4 times 7, 28, and 2, giving us 3,000. 100X is 3,000. Now divide both sides by 100 to figure out that X is 30. So what is 40% of 75? The answer is 30. Okay, I want to mention, if you've learned another way of doing this problem, okay, where you say what is equals, and 40% you write as the equivalent decimal 0.40, and the of is interpreted as multiplication. That's perfectly okay. If you have that method of doing it, that's fine. It's just, and there will be equivalent ways of doing all the problems. I'm going to, however, just solve it, each one by this XWP method. Okay? But if you had been used to doing something like that and writing 40% of 75 in this fashion and solving, representing the is by the equals, what is 40% of 75? In that case, you will get the same answer of 30. Okay, let's try another problem. %, 35% of 400 is what number? X is to W as P is to 100. 35% of 400 is what number? Once again, the 35%, this must be the P. This is 35. Because you see the percent. Okay, is what number? 35% of 400. 400, once again, is the whole. And we are trying to solve for X. Okay, 100 times something has to be equal to 35 times 400. Or cross-multiplying, 100X is 35 times 400. 400 times 35, or 100X equals, now 400 times 35, that's 0, 0. 4 times 5 is 20. Put down the 0, carry the 2. 3 times 4, 12, and 2, 14. And dividing by 100, X is 140. Okay. 35% of 400 is what number? 35% of 400 is 140. Okay, so you've seen two examples where what we were looking for was X. Let's try some more examples. 80 is 25% of what number? X is to W as P is to 100. The 25% must be the P. 80 is 25% of what number? 80 is the part in this case. 80 is the x, and we're looking for the whole. 80 is 25% of what number? Please notice the difference between this problem, say, and the one we just had. This one said 35% of 400 is what number? 35% of the whole is the part. Here, the part is 25% of the whole, and the whole is what we're looking for. Once again, cross multiplying. 25 times W is 80 times 100, or 8,000. Dividing both sides by 25, we're able to figure out that W equals, now, how many 25s in 8,000? 25 goes into 80 3 times. 3 times 25 is 75. Subtract, you get a 5, bring down the 0. 25 goes into 50 twice. Bring down the 0. 25 goes into 0 times. So 320 is the whole. 80 is 25% of 320. 25% is like a quarter. If you had to change it to a fraction, you would divide by 100 and drop the percent sign. So you would have 25 or 100 or a quarter. 80 is a quarter of 320. So that makes sense. %, of what number is 36? Once again, x is to w as p is to 100. 45%, that must be the p. Of what is 36? That must be the whole. And what we're given is the part. This is very similar to the problem we had before. This, of course, can be reread. 36 is 45% of what number? So this problem is the same as that in that we're looking for the W. 45% of what number is 36? Or 36 is 45% of what number? Cross multiplying, we get that 45W is 3,600, and then dividing, it's 45 times something is 3,600. So how can we figure out the something? We would have to divide by 45 to figure that out. W must be 3,600 over 45, or how many times does 45 go into 3,600? 45 doesn't go into 3. 6 into 360 goes about, let's see, 8 times 5 is 40. 4 times 8, 32, and 4, 36. Okay, so it's exactly 8 times. Remains a 0. How many times does 45 go into 0? 0 times. So the answer is 80. 45% of 80 is 36. We have seen some examples where we did not know the W and where we did not know the X. Now let's look at some examples where we don't know the P. What percent is 12 of 48? X is to W as P is to 100. This time, we need to find P, the percent. What percent? We need the P. Is 12 of 48? 12 is the part of the whole. which is 48. 12 over 48 to be expressed as a percent. Okay, what percent is 12 of 48? Is over of. Is 12 of 48? Is over of. And we have to, this is the part of the whole. Okay, we want to, basically what we're trying to do here is to rewrite this fraction as a percent. And what we're going to be doing, and you can do that separately. You can rewrite this as a percent, 12 over 48. Just transfer it into a percent by multiplying by 100 and adding the percent sign. Or you can solve this. Cross-multiplying 48p is 1,200. 48 times what is 1,200? You'd have to divide to figure that out. P is 1,200 divided by 48. 48 into 1,200. Okay, how many 48s in 12? No, in 120 goes twice. 2 times 48, 96. Subtracting 10, take away 6 gives us 4. 11, take away 9 gives us 2. How many 48s in 240? 48 times 5 gives us 5 times 8, 40. 4 times 5, 20, and 4, 240. So 25% is the answer. Of course, I think it would have been a lot easier to simply say 12 over 48 is to be expressed as a percent. We will first write it as a fraction, and it's a fraction, we can reduce it to lowest terms, and of course we would, to change that fraction to a percent, we multiply by 100 and add the percent sign, giving us the same answer of 25%. But if you've been having trouble with these problems, perhaps the XWP method, if you use it on all of them, will help you. Okay? So you may have other techniques that work, but this may be something that will carry you through all of your problems. X is to W as P is to 100. So 12 is to 48 as P is to 100, and we solve, and we figured out that P was 25% in this case. Okay. What percent of 125 is 75? What percent, once again, we're looking for the P, of 125 is 75. X is to W as P is to 100. We're looking for the P. Okay, once again, it's the is over the of. The part is the 75. That's the X. And the whole is the 125. It's not which comes first. Here, okay, it was is 12 of 48. This was the part, that was the whole. Here, it's of 125 is 75. 75 is the part of the whole, which is 125. 75 over 125. And now cross-multiplying. 125p is 7,500. P can be found, if 125 times something is 7,500, we have to divide 125 into 7,500 to get the answer. 125, okay, doesn't go into 7,500. Into 750 it goes, let's see, 6 times. 6 times 125, 6 times 5, 30. 2 times 6, 12, and 3, 15. 1 times 6 and 1, 7. And 125 into 0 goes 0, so the answer is 60 parts in 100, or 60%. Okay, let's try some word problems involving percent. Now, don't let the words confuse you. Basically, each problem is going to come down to trying to figure out either the X, the W, or the P. try this example. John answers 42 out of 60 questions correctly. What percent of his answers are correct? John answers 42 out of 60 questions correctly. What percent of his answers are correct? What this is asking really is what percent is 42 of 60? Because you first have to translate it into one of the previous types. Basically, he's answering 42 out of the 60 questions correctly. We want to figure out the percent. Okay, so obviously what you're looking for is the P. In the X is to W as P is to 100, you are looking for the P. The part that he got correct was 42. The whole, the number of questions on the test was 60. So 42 over 60 is P over 100. Okay, now we have to solve that. Okay, we can do this right over here. We cross multiply. 60 times P is 4,200. So P is going to be 4,200 over 60. And this we can do without any difficulty. 6 goes into 42 7 times, so this is 70, the answer. So he gets a 70% on the test if he gets 42 out of the 60 questions correct. What percent is 42 of 60? Is over of, writing that as a percent. And it comes out 70%. For our next example here, there are 35 students in a math class. Yesterday, 20% of the students were absent. How many students were absent? Don't let the words throw you. Okay, as I said, each of these problems involves finding either the X, the W, or the P. Okay, there are 35 students in a class. That's the whole class. 20% of the students were absent. How many students were absent? A part of the class was absent. So what we're looking for is a part of the class. How many students were absent? This is the X. We know the percent. And the whole is the 35. So X is to W as P is to 100. Basically, what we're asking for here is, if you want to rephrase it, what is 20% of 35? What is 20% of 35? This is the P. This is the whole. Percent, that's the whole. And we're looking for the part. So, X is what we're looking for. The part of the class that was absent. The whole class is 35 students. The percent is 20. X is to 35 as 20 is to 100. Cross multiplying, 100x is 35 times 20, but 35 times 20 is 700. If 100 times something is 700, that something must be 7. So 7 students were absent. Okay, so in the first problem we did in the word problems, we needed to find the P, the percent. Here we needed to find the X, the part. And in this problem, well, you tell me, 30% of the students in a class received final grades of A. If 9 students received A's, how many students were in the class? %30 of the students in a class received final grades of A. If 9 students received A's, how many students were in the class? Here we are being told the percent. We are told the part of the whole. We're told the X. And we want to know how many students were in the class. That's the whole class. So if we wanted to rephrase this, we could write it 30% of what number is 9? 30% of what number is 9? 30%, that's the percent of the whole, is the part, is 9. Okay. Now X is to W as P is to 100. 9 is the part. The whole is what we're looking for. The percent is 30. So 9 is to W as 30 is to 100. Cross multiplying, 30 times W is 900. 30 times something is 900. That something must be 900 divided by 30. And 900 divided by 30 is the same as 90 divided by 3, which is 30. So there are 30 students in the class. And that brings us to the end of this videotape.